5-year-old boy vanished on way to preschool. 13 years later, he makes a shocking discovery about himself that changes everything. A 5-year-old boy from Alabama vanished on what should have been an ordinary morning trip to preschool, leaving his mother devastated and authorities baffled. But 13 years later, when the boy attempts to apply for college, he stumbles upon a truth so shocking that it would expose one of the most elaborate deceptions in missing children cases and reveal that sometimes the person you are searching for is searching for themselves without even knowing it. August 28, 2002 started like any other Wednesday morning in Vestavia Hills, Alabama. The sun was beginning to rise over the quiet suburban community, casting long shadows across the apartment complex parking lots. Children across the neighborhood were getting ready for another day of summer activities, parents were preparing for work, and life moved at its usual peaceful pace. But for one family living at Vestavia Park Apartments, this Wednesday would mark the beginning of a mystery that would span over a decade and challenge everything they thought they knew about love, betrayal, and the lengths a parent might go to keep their child. The boy at the center of this extraordinary case was Julian, a bright-eyed 5-year-old with an infectious smile and the kind of boundless energy that made him a favorite among the neighborhood children. Julian lived with his mother in one unit of the apartment complex, while his father Bobby resided in a separate unit within the same building. This arrangement, though unconventional, had been working for the family as they navigated their complicated relationship dynamics. Julian had no way of knowing that this particular morning would be the last time he would see his mother for 13 long years. He had no idea that the man he trusted most in the world was about to make a decision that would tear apart not just one family, but an entire community that would spend years searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. As Julian prepared for what he believed would be a normal day at preschool, followed by playtime and bedtime stories, he could never have imagined that his father had already set in motion a plan that would erase his identity, separate him from his mother, and create a false life built on lies that would take more than a decade to uncover. Vestavia Hills, Alabama, was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, and children rode their bicycles freely through quiet streets lined with oak trees. The community prided itself on being safe, family-oriented, and close-knit. It was exactly the type of environment where a missing child case would send shockwaves through every household and leave residents questioning how such a thing could happen in their peaceful corner of the world. The Vestavia Park Apartments complex where Julian lived was home to working families, young couples and single parents trying to build better lives for their children. The buildings were well maintained, the grounds were safe, and there was a sense of community among the residents who often gathered by the pool during summer evenings or organized informal barbecues on weekends. Julian's parents, though living separately, had worked out what they believed was a functional arrangement for co-parenting their energetic son. His mother held legal custody of Julian, a fact that would later become crucial to understanding the gravity of what happened next. She was a devoted parent who worked hard to provide for her child while maintaining the stability he needed during what was already a challenging family situation. Bobby, Julian's father, lived just a few units away in the same apartment complex. This proximity allowed him to be actively involved in Julian's daily life while giving the former couple the space they needed to maintain their separate households. To outside observers, the arrangement seemed to be working reasonably well, with Julian able to spend time with both parents without the stress of long-distance visits or complicated custody exchanges. Julian himself was a typical 5-year-old who loved playing with toy cars, watching cartoons, and spending time at the community code playground. He was enrolled in a local preschool, where teachers described him as friendly, curious, and well-adjusted despite his parents' living situation. His bright personality and quick smile made him popular with other children, and he seemed to be thriving despite the complexities of his family dynamics. The morning of August 28th began normally enough. Julian's mother had prepared him for another day at preschool, making sure he had his backpack, his favorite snack, and everything he needed for a successful day of learning and play. The routine was familiar and comforting. Julian would be picked up by his father, taken to preschool, and then returned home in the afternoon. This arrangement had worked countless times before without incident. Bobby had proven himself to be reliable when it came to transportation duties, and Julian always seemed excited about spending time with his father during these trips. There was no reason for anyone to suspect that this particular Wednesday would be any different from the dozens of other preschool drop-offs that had gone smoothly in the past. As Julian hugged his mother goodbye and walked toward his father's car, neither of them realized they were sharing their final moment together for what would be 13 agonizing years. The trust that had been built through months of successful co-parenting was about to be shattered in the most devastating way possible. Bobby helped his son into the car, secured his seatbelt, and drove away from the apartment complex while Julian's mother waved goodbye from their front door. She watched the car disappear around the corner, confident that her son was in safe hands and would be returned to her that afternoon with stories about his day at school and requests for his favorite snacks. But as the hours passed and Bobby failed to return Julian as scheduled, a growing sense of unease would soon turn into panic, then desperation, and finally into a 13-year nightmare that would consume multiple families and leave a community forever changed by the realization that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. When Bobby's car pulled away from Vestavia Park Apartments that Wednesday morning, Julian settled into his car seat, expecting the familiar route to his preschool. The 5-year-old had made this trip countless times before, and he knew exactly what to expect. A short drive through the neighborhood, arrival at the colorful building where his teachers would greet him with warm smiles, and a day filled with games, learning activities, and time with his friends. But instead of taking the usual left turn toward the preschool, Bobby made a right turn onto the highway. Julian, focused on a toy car he had brought along for the ride, did not immediately notice that something was different about their route. By the time he looked up and realized they were traveling on unfamiliar roads, they were already miles away from everything he had ever known. When Julian asked where they were going, Bobby told him they were taking a special trip together. The explanation satisfied the trusting 5-year-old, who had no reason to question his father's motives or doubt that this unexpected adventure was anything other than a fun surprise. Julian had always enjoyed spending time with his father, and the prospect of doing something new and exciting seemed like a wonderful way to spend the day. Meanwhile, back at the preschool, teachers began to notice that Julian had not arrived for the morning session. This was unusual, as Bobby had always been punctual with drop-offs in the past. When the administrative staff called the number they had on file to check on Julian's absence, they reached his mother, who immediately felt a chill of panic run through her body. Julian's mother explained that Bobby had picked up their son that morning for the usual preschool run and should have arrived at the school hours earlier. The preschool staff confirmed that Julian had never been dropped off, and no one had heard from Bobby to explain the absence. This news sent Julian's mother into a state of alarm that would only intensify as the hours passed without any word from either her son or his father. She immediately began calling Bobby's phone number, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She drove to his apartment unit in their complex, but found it empty with no signs of when he might return. She contacted Bobby's workplace, his friends, and anyone else who might have information about his whereabouts, but no one had seen or heard from him since the previous day. As afternoon turned to evening with no word from Bobby or Julian, Julian's mother made the decision that would officially transform a concerning situation into a missing persons case. She called the Vestavia Hills Police Department to report that her 5-year-old son had vanished along with his non-custodial father, and she feared that something terrible had happened to them both. The responding officers took the report seriously from the very beginning. They understood that parental abductions, while often less publicized than stranger kidnappings, represented a significant threat to children and could result in long-term psychological damage even when the child was not physically harmed. The fact that Bobby did not have legal custody of Julian made his failure to return the boy particularly concerning from a legal standpoint. Detective units immediately began investigating Bobby's background, his recent activities, and any possible indicators of where he might have taken Julian. They discovered that Bobby had no history of violence or criminal behavior, but they also found evidence that he had been struggling with the custody arrangement and had expressed frustration about his limited time with his son. The investigation revealed that Bobby had recently closed his bank accounts, quit his job, and made other preparations that suggested he had been planning to disappear for some time. This evidence transformed the case from a possible accident or misunderstanding into a clear case of premeditated parental abduction. Law enforcement agencies across Alabama and neighboring states were alerted to be on the lookout for Bobby's vehicle and any signs of the missing father and son. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was contacted to create official missing person materials and coordinate the search efforts across multiple jurisdictions. Julian's photograph was distributed to police departments, posted in public places, and shared through early internet networks in hopes that someone, somewhere, would recognize the little boy and provide information about his whereabouts. Age progression specialists began working on updated images showing what Julian might look like as he grew older, creating visual tools that would be used in the search efforts for years to come. The Vestavia Hills community rallied around Julian's mother, organizing search parties, distributing flyers, and maintaining hope that the little boy would be found safe and returned home. Local media outlets covered the case extensively, keeping Julian's face in the public eye and encouraging anyone with information to contact authorities immediately. But as days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, the trail grew cold. Despite numerous reported sightings and potential leads that took investigators to different states and cities, no concrete evidence emerged about where Bobby had taken Julian or whether the child was even still alive. Julian's mother never stopped hoping, never stopped searching, and never stopped believing that her son would somehow find his way back to her. She maintained his bedroom exactly as he had left it, celebrated his birthday every year, and worked closely with law enforcement and missing children organizations to keep his case active and in the public consciousness. What she could never have imagined was that hundreds of miles away, her son was growing up under a completely different identity, attending school under a false name, and living a life built entirely on lies, all while having no idea that his mother was desperately searching for him, or that he was considered one of Alabama's most important missing children cases. While Julian's mother spent sleepless nights wondering if her son was safe, Julian himself was adapting to a completely new existence in Cleveland, Ohio. Bobby had chosen this industrial city as their new home specifically because it was far enough from Alabama to reduce the chances of being recognized, but large enough for them to blend in among the diverse population without attracting unwanted attention. The transformation of Julian's identity was swift and thorough. Bobby had prepared false documentation, including a forged birth certificate that gave Julian a completely different name and birth date. The 5-year-old who had once been Julian became someone else entirely, with a new surname, a fabricated personal history, and no legal connection to his previous life in Alabama. Bobby enrolled his son in elementary school using the falsified documents, creating an entirely fictional background for their family. Teachers and school administrators had no reason to suspect that the quiet, well-behaved child in their classrooms was actually a missing person whose face had been distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. Julian adapted to his new identity with the remarkable resilience that children often display when faced with dramatic changes in their circumstances. At 5 years old, he possessed only limited memories of his life in Alabama, and Bobby was careful to discourage any questions about their past or attempts to contact people from their previous life. When Julian asked about his mother, Bobby provided explanations that satisfied the young child while gradually erasing her from his memory. Bobby told his son that his mother had not wanted to be part of their lives anymore, that she had chosen to stay behind while they started fresh in their new city. These lies, repeated consistently over time, became Julian's accepted reality. As Julian grew older, Bobby reinforced their false identity by creating an elaborate fictional family history. He spoke about imaginary relatives, described made-up childhood experiences, and provided detailed backstories that helped Julian feel grounded in their new life. Bobby even introduced Julian to a woman who became a stepmother figure, further solidifying their cover story and providing Julian with what appeared to be a stable family environment. The woman who became Julian's stepmother was unaware of the true circumstances surrounding his presence in their household. Bobby had told her that Julian's biological mother was out of the picture due to personal problems, and she accepted this explanation without questioning the lack of legal documentation or communication with Julian's supposed extended family. Julian excelled academically throughout his elementary and middle school years. Teachers consistently described him as intelligent, focused, and well-adjusted. He participated in school activities, formed friendships with classmates, and displayed none of the behavioral problems that might have indicated the trauma of his early childhood experience. What made Julian's adaptation even more remarkable was that he appeared to genuinely thrive in his new environment. He developed interests in technology and science, maintained good grades, and looked forward to eventually attending college. To outside observers, he seemed like a perfectly normal teenager with a bright future ahead of him. Bobby, meanwhile, worked various jobs throughout Cleveland to support their household while maintaining a low profile that would not draw attention from authorities. He used false identification to obtain employment, opened bank accounts under his assumed name, and built what appeared to be a legitimate life in their new community. The psychological toll of maintaining such an elaborate deception was significant, though Bobby showed no outward signs of the stress he must have been experiencing. He lived every day knowing that a single mistake, an unexpected encounter with someone from their past, or a routine background check could expose their entire fabricated existence and result in his arrest. Bobby also had to manage Julian's natural curiosity about their family history and background. As Julian grew into his teenage years, he began asking more sophisticated questions about their relatives, their life before Cleveland, and why they seemed to have no connection to extended family members. Bobby became increasingly skilled at deflecting these questions while providing just enough information to satisfy Julian's curiosity without revealing the truth. The most challenging aspect of their deception was Julian's growing desire to understand his own identity and background. Like most teenagers, Julian was beginning to develop a stronger sense of self and wanted to know more about where he came from, what his early childhood had been like, and why certain aspects of their family history seemed unclear or contradictory. Bobby handled these questions by gradually revealing what he claimed were painful family secrets that explained their isolation from relatives and their decision to start fresh in Cleveland. He portrayed their move as a necessary escape from difficult circumstances, making Julian feel protective of their privacy and less likely to push for additional information. What neither Bobby nor Julian realized was that this carefully constructed life was built on a foundation that would inevitably collapse. The false documents that had served them well when Julian was a child would not withstand the more thorough scrutiny required for college applications, employment background checks, and other adult responsibilities. As Julian approached his 18th birthday and began making plans for his future, including college applications and career goals, the web of lies that had protected them for over a decade was about to unravel in the most unexpected and dramatic way possible. By 2015, Julian had grown into an intelligent and ambitious 18-year-old with dreams of attending college and building a successful career. He had spent his entire adolescence believing that he was living under his real name, with legitimate identification documents, and a family history that, while somewhat vague, provided him with a sense of identity and belonging. Julian's academic performance throughout high school had been exceptional, earning him the respect of his teachers and the admiration of his peers. He had developed particular interests in technology and business, and he was eager to pursue higher education that would allow him to explore these fields in greater depth. College represented not just an educational opportunity, but a chance to begin building an independent adult life. The process of applying to colleges requires extensive documentation, including social security information, birth certificates, and other official records that verify an applicant's identity and eligibility for enrollment. For most students, gathering these documents is a routine administrative task that presents no complications or concerns. But when Julian began working with his high school guidance counselor to complete his college applications, they encountered a problem that initially seemed like a simple clerical error, but would ultimately expose the elaborate deception that had defined his entire life. The issue first surfaced when Julian provided his social security number to verify his identity for college application purposes. The counselor entered the number into the system, expecting to find Julian's basic information and confirm his eligibility to receive financial aid and other student services. Instead, the system returned an error message indicating that the social security number Julian had provided did not match the name he was using. This type of discrepancy sometimes occurs due to data entry mistakes, name changes, or other minor administrative issues that can usually be resolved quickly with additional documentation. Julian's counselor asked him to double-check the social security number and bring in his social security card to verify the information. When Julian provided the card, the counselor noticed that while the number matched what Julian had given them, there were subtle irregularities in the document's appearance that raised additional questions. Concerned that Julian might be the victim of identity theft or document fraud, the counselor decided to conduct a more thorough investigation. She contacted the Social Security Administration to verify Julian's information and determine whether his documents were legitimate. The inquiry revealed that the social security number Julian had been using his entire life belonged to someone else entirely, and there was no record of anyone with Julian's name and birth date in the federal databases. This discovery suggested that Julian's identity documents were fraudulent, but it did not immediately explain how or why he had come to possess false identification. The counselor realized that she was dealing with a situation far more complex than a simple case of identity theft or document fraud. She began researching missing persons databases to determine whether Julian might be connected to any unsolved cases involving missing children or identity theft victims. Her search led her to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database, where she discovered a case that made her blood run cold. There, among the photographs of long missing children, was an image that bore an unmistakable resemblance to the young man sitting in her office. The missing child case dated back to 2002 and involved a 5-year-old boy named Julian, who had disappeared from Alabama after his non-custodial father failed to return him from a preschool trip. The case had remained active for over 13 years, with age progression images showing what the missing child might look like as a teenager. When the counselor showed Julian the missing persons report and the age progression photographs, his world collapsed in an instant. The young man who had spent 13 years believing he knew who he was and where he came from suddenly realized that his entire life had been built on lies. Julian stared at the photographs and case information in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what he was seeing. The details in the missing persons report matched his approximate age and physical description, but more importantly, the case described a family situation and geographical background that contradicted everything Bobby had told him about their past. The most shocking revelation was learning that he had a mother in Alabama who had never stopped searching for him, who had maintained his bedroom exactly as he had left it, and who had spent 13 years wondering whether her son was dead or alive. The woman Julian had been told did not want him anymore had actually been desperately trying to find him for over a decade. Julian's initial reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by anger, confusion, and a profound sense of betrayal. The man he had trusted as his father, the person who had raised him and provided for him throughout his childhood, had built their entire relationship on a foundation of lies and deception. At the same time, Julian felt torn between his anger at Bobby's deception and his genuine affection for the man who had been his primary parent figure for 13 years. Bobby had not been abusive or neglectful. He had provided Julian with a loving home environment, educational opportunities, and emotional support throughout his childhood and adolescence. The counselor immediately contacted law enforcement authorities to report the discovery, setting in motion a chain of events that would bring Julian's case to national attention and finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted his mother and the investigators who had never given up hope of finding him. Julian found himself at the center of a media storm as news outlets picked up the extraordinary details of his case. The young man who had wanted nothing more than to apply to college and begin building his adult life suddenly faced the overwhelming challenge of reconstructing his identity, reconnecting with a mother he barely remembered, and coming to terms with the realization that everything he thought he knew about himself had been fabricated. The phone call that Julian's mother received on a Monday afternoon in November 2015 was one she had both dreamed of and dreaded for 13 long years. When Vestavia Hills Police Department Lieutenant Johnny Evans contacted her to say that Julian had been found alive and well in Cleveland, Ohio, her initial reaction was disbelief mixed with overwhelming relief. She had not given up on finding him. Lieutenant Evans later told reporters, she had not heard anything in a while. It was just a shock to her to all of a sudden be told on a Monday afternoon, he is found. The news came so suddenly after years of false leads and disappointments that Julian's mother needed time to process the reality that her son was actually coming home. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, Bobby was taken into custody by Ohio authorities on charges related to kidnapping, interference with custody, and tampering with records. The man who had spent 13 years building a new life with his son now faced the consequences of his decision to flee Alabama with Julian in 2002. The arrest presented Julian with one of the most emotionally challenging situations of his young life. Despite learning the truth about his identity and his mother's 13-year search for him, Julian still felt genuine affection and loyalty toward the man who had raised him. Bobby had not been a cruel or abusive father. He had provided Julian with love, stability, and opportunities throughout his childhood. Julian's conflicted feelings became apparent when he spoke on Bobby's behalf during the sentencing hearing. "I forgive him," Julian told the court, demonstrating a maturity and compassion that impressed everyone present. He asked the judge not to send Bobby to prison, explaining that while he understood the seriousness of what his father had done, he did not want to lose the only parent he had really known. The legal proceedings revealed the extent of Bobby's deception and the careful planning that had gone into Julian's abduction. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that Bobby had prepared false documents, established new identities, and made financial arrangements well in advance of taking Julian from Alabama. This was not a spontaneous decision made in a moment of emotional crisis, but a calculated plan to permanently separate Julian from his mother. Bobby ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple charges in Ohio, including kidnapping and document fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, though he would also face additional charges in Alabama once he completed his Ohio sentence. The legal consequences reflected the serious nature of his crimes, but they also acknowledged that Julian had not suffered physical abuse during his time in Cleveland. For Julian, the legal resolution was only the beginning of a much longer and more complex process of rebuilding his life and identity. The young man who had been preparing for college just weeks earlier now faced the overwhelming task of reconnecting with a mother he barely remembered and coming to terms with 13 years of fabricated family history. The reunion between Julian and his mother was both joyful and emotionally complicated. They met for the first time since he was 5 years old during the Thanksgiving holiday season, giving them an opportunity to begin the difficult process of rebuilding their relationship in a private setting, away from media attention. Julian's mother had maintained his childhood bedroom exactly as he had left it 13 years earlier, preserving his toys, clothes, and personal belongings as a shrine to the little boy she hoped would someday return. Seeing these remnants of his early childhood helped Julian recover some memories of his life before the abduction, but it also underscored how much time had been lost. The process of reconnecting was challenging for both Julian and his mother. He was no longer the 5-year-old child she remembered, but an 18-year-old young man with his own personality, interests, and life goals. She had to adjust to having a teenage son rather than the little boy she had been searching for, while Julian had to form a relationship with a woman who was essentially a stranger despite being his biological mother. Julian also faced practical challenges related to reclaiming his legal identity. He needed to obtain legitimate identification documents, update his school records, and make decisions about his college plans. The false documents that had allowed him to attend school in Cleveland were no longer valid, requiring him to work with Alabama authorities to establish his true legal status. The media attention surrounding Julian's case was both helpful and overwhelming. While the publicity helped raise awareness about parental abduction cases and provided hope for other families dealing with missing children, it also made it difficult for Julian to process his situation privately and begin healing from the trauma of learning about his fabricated identity. Julian ultimately decided to maintain his privacy and focus on moving forward with his life rather than dwelling on the deception of his past. He released a public statement asking for privacy and expressing his desire to simply be normal as he worked toward his goals of attending college and building an independent adult life. The case provided law enforcement agencies with valuable insights into how parental abductions can remain undetected for extended periods, particularly when the abducting parent is able to create convincing false documentation and establish a stable living situation in a different geographical area. Julian's resilience and maturity in handling such extraordinary circumstances impressed everyone who worked with him throughout the legal proceedings and reunion process. His ability to forgive Bobby while also embracing the opportunity to reconnect with his mother demonstrated an emotional intelligence that served him well as he navigated one of the most challenging situations any young person could face. Julian's extraordinary case offers profound insights into the resilience of the human spirit, the unbreakable bonds between parents and children, and the complex nature of love and betrayal within families. His experience demonstrates that even in the most challenging circumstances, hope and healing remain possible when people approach difficult situations with courage, compassion, and determination. One of the most remarkable aspects of Julian's situation was his ability to maintain his emotional balance while processing the shocking discovery of his true identity. Rather than becoming consumed by anger or bitterness toward Bobby, Julian chose to focus on moving forward with his life while maintaining compassion for the man who had raised him. This mature response showed a level of emotional intelligence that enabled him to begin healing rather than becoming trapped by resentment. Julian's mother's unwavering dedication to finding her son serves as an inspiration to other families facing similar situations. Her decision to never give up hope, even after 13 years without concrete leads, ultimately contributed to Julian's discovery and safe return. Her story reminds us that persistence and faith can triumph over seemingly impossible circumstances. The case also highlights the importance of routine verification procedures in identifying missing persons. Julian's discovery came not through a dramatic police investigation or chance encounter, but through the mundane process of college application paperwork. This demonstrates how missing children cases can be solved through everyday interactions when the right systems and awareness programs are in place. Law enforcement agencies learned valuable lessons about the long-term nature of parental abduction cases and the importance of maintaining active investigations even when leads grow cold. Julian's case proved that missing children can be found after many years, providing hope and motivation for investigators working on other long-term missing persons cases. The emotional complexity of Julian's situation also provides important insights into the psychological impact of parental abduction on children. Unlike stranger kidnappings, parental abductions often involve loving relationships between the child and the abducting parent, creating conflicted feelings when the truth is eventually revealed. Julian's experience shows that healing from such situations requires understanding, patience, and professional support. For other families dealing with missing children cases, Julian's experience offers both hope and practical guidance. His discovery demonstrates that missing children can be found even after many years, that healing and reconnection are possible despite extended separations, and that the bonds between parents and children can survive even the most challenging circumstances. Julian's decision to pursue his college education and build an independent adult life despite the trauma of his discovery shows the importance of focusing on future goals rather than becoming trapped by past circumstances. His determination to move forward while maintaining relationships with both his mother and his complicated feelings toward Bobby demonstrates the possibility of creating a positive future even after experiencing profound betrayal and loss. The broader community response to Julian's case also illustrates the power of collective support in helping families heal from traumatic experiences. The outpouring of public sympathy and encouragement that Julian and his mother received provided them with additional strength during their most difficult moments. Julian's experience reminds us that truth has a way of emerging even when it has been buried under years of deception. His case shows that elaborate lies and false identities may work temporarily, but they ultimately cannot withstand the scrutiny required for adult responsibilities and life milestones. Most importantly, Julian's situation demonstrates that healing and forgiveness are possible even in the most complex and painful circumstances. His ability to maintain love for Bobby while embracing the opportunity to reconnect with his mother shows that human beings have a remarkable capacity for resilience, compassion, and growth. If you found this case as incredible as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more extraordinary true crime investigations that will challenge everything you think you know about human nature, family bonds, and the power of hope in the darkest circumstances. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest deep investigations into the most compelling cases from around the world that prove truth really can be stranger than fiction.